Okay, thank you so much, Jamie. So hopefully you can all hear me just fine. And we will go ahead and get started on what is week 3 in our Productivity Monday series. We are specifically featuring the curriculum Time Well Spent Productivity Skills for Success that myself and some colleagues authored with Kentucky Cooperative Extension, Family and Consumer Sciences. And it's a new curriculum, new this year. And so we're so excited to share that with you all. All right, let me get my slides advancing. Okay, like Jamie said, I am Dr. Nichole Huff. I am an assistant extension professor and specialist for family finance and resource management here at the University of Kentucky and with Kentucky Cooperative Extension. And so, part of my job definitely involves helping people better manage their finances. But another part of my job also helps people better manage their resources. And so we think about our capital in terms of our financial capital, and that is correct. But we also have many other types of capital, such as our human capital and our social capital. And part of that are the resources that we manage, things like our time and our energy and our relationships. And these are all important parts of our productivity and our ability to be successful both in our professional and personal lives. And so the first week we talked about procrastination. Last week, you were joined by Mindy McCulley, who is part of the team who wrote this curriculum. And she talked to you about organizing your time and your workspace and how, your space matters. And then today we'll be talking about establishing priorities and building focus and what that entails. And then next week, I do hope you'll join us for the last week in the series. It's one of my very favorite lessons on work-life balance. And as a faculty who joined UK during the pandemic and have been just like everybody else listening, and watching, have been trying to, stay afloat with home and work responsibilities. And how do you do that and avoid burnout and stay healthy, mentally healthy, physically healthy, and still be productive, right? Because at the end of the day, we need to be productive in order to be successful. And so we'll talk about what that looks like. And it's one of my very favorite lessons. All right, so like I said, today we are going to we're going to look at the Eisenhower matrix, and we'll start our time together by doing that and how we can use that as a tool to prioritize our tasks. We're going to talk about finding flow and focus and how we can often, get derailed in our focus and we never even get to that flow. And so we are struggling to maintain focus, and that of course impedes our productivity. Talk about a few task management techniques, and then look at how goals and establishing goals can help us with our productivity. And so if you have access to the chat right now, and this is not your first week, and so if you've joined us before, if you would just type in the chat, what is something you've taken away from one of the first 2 lessons? Is there a certain tip or a reminder that you have put into practice as part of this productivity series? And then if today is your very first time joining us, what is something you hope to take away? Why were you intrigued to spend your lunch hour on a webinar about productivity? So hopefully we'll see some chat responses come in. So what's been your biggest takeaway so far, or what do you hope to take away before the series is up? Time management, working from home. And so, yeah, that'll especially be something that we've talked about. We've hit several weeks, but then we'll wrap that up next week. Juggling. Yeah, juggling is, we're actually going to specifically talk about that next week as well. Prioritizing tasks, emails, productivity journaling. That is a great one. how to keep from getting distracted. We'll talk about some reminders on that today. Yeah, the procrastination and time management skills and productive procrastination. So learning new responsibilities. Yeah, the day-to-day tasks can get in the way, and the importance of creating checklists. We'll touch on that again today. The filing archives, right? The more organized we can be, both physically and digitally, the more we can focus on what we're doing instead of allowing that to get in the way. All the emails, yeah, we'll touch on that today as well. And looking, creating a system for your email is also really important. That way you can read it, respond, and file it. And so sometimes we can think that when we organize, it can, we can pay too much attention to detail. And I would argue that no, the more organized that we can be, the more efficient we can be, because we know where to find everything and we are not spending our time looking. Okay, so new here. All right, yeah, so we'll talk some on minimizing our distractions. Yeah, a disorganized workspace indicates a disorganized headspace. Yes, I agree with that, Jenny. And I would say research also agrees with that. And so when we have clutter, it can also often represent that we just have clutter that is not being managed in our lives, right? And that can all help us feel like we are draining. Yeah, prioritization is a buzzword. So thank you all for sharing. And if you are new to the series, you can reach out. I know that Jamie and Azetta and the Work Life team will be happy to share with you the recordings and the emails. And each week we have a publication that summarizes everything that we've talked about. And we also have some helpful handouts if you want just a reminder of how to put some of this into practice. So yeah, definitely reach back out to the team and see if you can get that. And you're welcome to reach out to me directly as well, and I can send you those materials, Nichole.huff@uky.edu. All right, so let's jump in. And you may have seen, when I started just answering your questions, I silenced my watch. I realized that I had a ding go off, and that was a distraction to me. And it was a distraction I didn't minimize. And so and I felt as soon as it dinged, my mind kind of derailed, right? My train of thought derailed. And we're going to talk about how distractions can derail our productivity and our task and our train of thought. And every time we have to reel our minds back in, it takes up our valuable time, but also takes up our energy. And so and I always start out with that disclaimer that I am in no ways a productivity expert, but I am a working professional who constantly needs these reminders myself so that I can bring my best self to the workplace, but that I can also give my best self to my family and my colleagues. And so I am, as they would say here in the South, preaching to the choir a lot, right? I am in no ways an expert on productivity, but I am a professional who really values these tips and values the research behind them so that we can become more effective time managers. All right, and so each of these lessons we started with this idea of a quote, and so this lesson it has a quote by President Kennedy: "We must use time as a tool, not as a couch." So does anybody want to take a guess as to what I mean by that? How do we use time as a tool? And how would we use time as a couch? What's the distinction here? Okay, maybe moving forward. Other thoughts or ideas? How can time be used as a tool? Getting off the couch. You can't just sit on it. You need to use it to our advantage. Yeah. Absolutely. So this idea that don't be lazy with it, right? Like don't just rest on our time because the time is going to pass whether we utilize it or not. Regardless of how some days feel, and we may be busy, and we talked about the difference between busyness and productivity. We may be busy, but the time is going to pass anyway. So whether we use it to our advantage or not, the time, we still have the same amount of time in a day, and it goes by at the same speed. And so when we use time as a tool, we are being proactive. We are realizing that we can be active instead of seeing time as something that is passive. We don't necessarily, we don't need to rest on it, right? We need to get off the couch, as someone said. I'm using time to do something versus to postpone, right? To postpone into productivity. So let's think of this, how time is one of our biggest tools. It can be one of our greatest investment, and how we invest it, how we use it, it matters. All right, so how many of you have heard of the Eisenhower matrix? Has anybody heard of this? Yes or no, or you can give a little emoji if you have seen or used the Eisenhower matrix. Okay, I'm seeing some no's. Okay, I'm seeing mostly no's. Couple of thumbs up who have used it. Couple of have. So we kind of got split. So if this is new to you, I'll introduce the tool. And if it's not, hopefully this will just be a good reminder of ways that we can prioritize our tasks. And so the Eisenhower matrix was developed by, President Dwight D. Eisenhower. And he used this during World War II to make important decisions that he needed to make in terms of his role with the United States Army and how he prioritized tasks. And if you have sat through any kind of productivity seminar or read a book or an article on it, likely they have mentioned the Eisenhower matrix. It is not something we invented by any means, but it is a tool that is embraced by many productivity researchers because of its the power in helping us prioritize what tasks are urgent and need to be done now. They're both urgent and important. What tasks might be important, but maybe that they can be done another time. So they are tasks that we can do later. Tasks that are urgent but not important, so that you may have a arbitrary deadline, you need to meet it. Is it probably highest on your priority list? No, but you need to be compliant with your deadline. So it has urgency, but not necessarily importance. And then there's stuff that may not be urgent or important. So what the Eisenhower matrix asks us to do is to reflect on something along the continuum of importance, from a little to a lot, and urgency, a little to a lot. And then we look at the overlap and help use this as a tool to prioritize. And in the tools that you'll get after the webinar, you'll receive a blank one of these that you can use and download. All right, and so let's see. All right, so the Eisenhower matrix, like I said, it's divided up into 4 quadrants, and part of intentionality with managing your tasks is to prioritize. And that is a word that has come up over and over, that and intentionality. Those are both buzzwords in this curriculum. So in that first quadrant, those are these things that are both urgent and important. So that might be if a crisis comes up that needs to be responded to immediately. If there are deadlines that are very, very pressing, if depending on your job role, some tasks might be prioritized over others, and so that they carry a little more weight and need to be done first. And so when we don't prioritize, we find ourselves using energy that we are not putting towards our first task and our most important task. So if you followed me in week 1, we talked about eating that frog, right? But if we use up all of our energy all day long instead of focusing on what we should do first, then when we get back around to it, we're kind of depleted. And so we may not have that mental energy that we need. So these are those tasks that they have hard deadlines, they are necessary to helping you achieve your goals, and really are very important for you and your job. So you should prioritize them. And so your matrix, I will go ahead and note that it will look different depending on whether you're prioritizing your home task or your work task. And so sometimes these may, compete, and we'll talk next week about how to balance it when you have competing obligations. But really, it could look different. So, for example, returning a call to your a colleague or a supervisor may be more important, and it may take that top quadrant if you are on the clock, right? If it is, you are on the clock. But if you are off the clock, then what you prioritize, returning a call or responding to an email can wait till the next day, depending on the task. And so how you prioritize will look different depending on your the context, right? Context always matters. Okay, so the next quadrant is the important, not urgent. So these are the tasks that may have future deadlines. And so they need to be done, but they don't have to be done right now. And we can move them into other quadrants as time progresses, because if not, you may find yourself in a position like me. I got a reminder email this morning saying, hey, don't forget this deadline. And so it's something that is not, it's important for my job, and it's important something that I produce that can be used by others in my work. But because it wasn't urgent, I let it kind of fall to the wayside. And so it's important when we put things off into our due later quadrant that we remember to move them over in our calendar. But these are the things that that allow us to progress. They may be some standing deadlines that we have. They are valued, and that they contribute to our long-term success. And so we need to do them. Now, if we're looking at the bottom two quadrants, the delegate quadrant is those tasks that are urgent. They need to get done, but they don't necessarily have to be done by you. Now, if you're like me, you may have had to practice the art of delegation. That sometimes, and many people who struggle with productivity and procrastination often do so because they are perfectionists. And I myself am a recovering perfectionist. And that one of the things I've had to realize is that for me to be successful at my job, I had to let other people do their jobs. Or when I was signing up for team tasks, that I signed up for the things that played to my strengths and let others sign up for the things that played to theirs, so that I wasn't spending my time on something that could be done by something else. And so this quadrant is especially important if you are working in a team environment or if you have designated roles. And so say there you have a graphic design department and you're creating a flyer for an upcoming event, but that's not necessarily your job. You aren't tasked with creating the flyers. And so letting somebody else do that that is part of their job responsibility. And you doing things in this quadrant only when your time permits. And this could be important. This quadrant could be a really important one at home, right? So I have 3 kids. Two of those are teenagers. So we use the art of delegation quite a bit in our home because it is one of the only ways that we can function. And so there are tasks that are better served if a parent does them, but there are tasks that can be done by a teenager, for example, the dishwasher. Now, do I love the way that it is loaded and unloaded? No, but I've had to let that go because the fact is that it gets loaded and unloaded and I didn't have to do it. I was able to delegate that task and focus on something that only I could do. And then of course, the last quadrant is what can be avoided. And so they are trivial. They might be some of those things that you are using to procrastinate, keeping you busy, but it's not advancing you towards your goals. Are they things that you can outsource, like we talked about last week? Are there things that you can just eliminate altogether? The things that are trivial, that are really taking up your time, and but don't have urgency or importance. So this is a helpful tool in prioritizing your tasks, and it will be included in the information that we send to you. All right, so now finding flow. So how flow is one of those things. And so it may be when you get so engrossed in a task that you don't even notice time passing, right? It can be maybe this is something that you may have definitely found flow if you have a hobby, or if um you know like to have some kind of artistic thing, or maybe you're a runner and you just get in a mindset and you don't even mind the time. You don't notice how far you've gone. This is this idea of flow, when we become so engaged with what we're doing that nothing else matters. And ideally, to be productive, we want to find flow in our work. And so that's why the things we talked about last week with how important it is to organize our space, because that can contribute to our mindset. It can contribute to how we find flow in our tasks. And there are a couple of things I've mentioned playing to your strengths, but we'll talk about two ways in particular that you can find flow while you're working. The first is to quit multitasking. Research says time and time again that multitasking it derails our productivity. It keeps us from being as productive as we could because we don't typically find flow when we stop. Instead, every time we stop, we have to use that mental energy to pick back up where we left off, and it's chipping away at both our time and our energy. And we equate that to kind of like you're watching a TV show, right? And every time it gets good, the storyline gets good, they go to commercial break. And then it gets good again, and you go to commercial break. And each time an ad pops up, you become less and less invested in the show, and to the point that you're tempted to just cut it off altogether. And that our mind operates in much that same way when we multitask. And so it's like a commercial break. Our minds keep going to commercial break. We lose momentum and we never quite get to the peak of that story because we're not allowing our minds to focus. And so, how do we quit multitasking? We minimize our emails, we minimize our screens, we mute our phones, we mute our watches, we put in earbuds or some kind of noise canceling device to help us tune out distractions. We give ourselves time to focus on one task at a time until we move on to something else. But we quit trying to do everything at once. And so quit multitasking. The second way to increase your flow is to play to your strengths. So if you know you are a natural organizer, then before you sit down to try to work on a task, do a quick outline, organize your notes, organize your files, or make yourself a to-do list, outline your tasks, because you know that once you gain momentum and you're playing to your strength of organization, that it may help that snowball of momentum. And we've talked about that throughout the curriculum. But how can you just get started so that getting started can help you build momentum? Maybe you are a socializer, and maybe that is a strength of yours, but can also be a downside. So if you know you work best after you have socialized for a little bit, then schedule a block of work time after a brainstorming meeting, because 30 minutes on Zoom or a phone call or a coffee break with a colleague it inspires your creativity, it inspires your momentum. So you are playing to your strength of socialization. But whatever your strength is, find ways to incorporate it into your work. And so these are things we can do. And some of them Mindy talked about last week with clutter and the atmosphere in our workplace. But when we create ourselves environments that are conducive to productivity, we can often find flow, and then when we are in a state of flow, we can get much, much more done. All right, so some more tips to control your time are three time techniques that I'll touch on: the 1 minute rule, the 5 minute rule, and the Pomodoro method. So the 1 minute rule is if you can do something in 1 minute, do it. Don't put it off. That means if you have read that email and you can respond in under a minute, respond to that email. Don't put it off. Don't come back to it, because then you've taken the time to read it once. You have to find it, read it later, reply later. But if you can do it in under 60 seconds, if you can schedule a quick meeting, schedule a Zoom, answer with a quick reply, and then file it away in whatever system you have for your files, because it'll reduce the clutter in your inbox, but it'll allow you to get something done. So if it's a tiny task that you can do quickly, just do it. Don't put it off. Now, the 5 minute rule is it can be, say you respond to emails too much, right? And so rather than responding all during the hour, you reserve maybe that last 5 minutes of an hour to respond to emails. Maybe you reserve 5 minutes of every hour to work on a larger task that you've deconstructed. So you are not sure where to work on this project. And so you're giving yourself 5 or 10 minutes if you're feeling ambitious, but you're giving yourself a small chunk of time that a little bit over the course of your day, you will begin to see progress, and you can chip away at some of those smaller tasks so that you can begin to know where you need to focus your time on the larger. So a 5 minute rule, can you devote 5 minutes to a bigger task, or can you consolidate a large task like email into 5 minutes of every hour? All right, so the Pomodoro method is good if you are one that is easily distracted. And so you agree to work for 25 minutes without any distractions. Then you give yourself a 5 minute break. You get up, you go to the restroom, you take a quick walk, you get a cup of coffee, you scroll social media. But after that 5 minutes, you give back and you give yourself another 25-minute block without interruptions. The same, and you get a 5 minute reward. And so because what this does, it allows us to delay gratification. We know we can take a brain break and do something different. But at the end of that hour, we have gotten 50 minutes of uninterrupted work time. And it can be a good way to batch your time, especially in the morning or after lunch, or maybe you do this for 2 hour-long cycles, and then it's lunchtime. So then you can have a larger break, but you've batched your time in the morning, you've minimized your distractions. And so these are 3 tips to control your time if time seems to get away from you. All right, so some other ways to minimize your distractions, because again, every time we get distracted, we have to use energy and time to rein back in our thoughts. And so a good way to do this is to really be intentional with your scheduling. Now, if you have a colleague or a coworker or an administrative assistant or somebody that puts a lot of things, a supervisor, on your schedule that you don't have control over, it can be maybe worth negotiating a conversation. But the more you can have either some whole days, if you can do it. If I am able, I try to give myself 1 day a week where I don't schedule Zooms, I don't schedule meetings with students or colleagues, I don't schedule face-to-face visits or appointments, because I know that if I don't have uninterrupted work time, then I won't write or I won't get some of those larger tasks done. So I try to save my schedule. Now, that is not always, it's not always possible. And so for those weeks that it's not possible, then I try to build in 1 or 2 afternoons or 1 or 2 mornings where I know I can work for a few hours without interruptions. I stack my meetings if possible. So I might meet all day long on Tuesdays and Thursdays, because that's the days I teach. So that Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I can have as little interruptions as possible so that I can actually get tangible things done. But so whatever works best for you, be really intentional about how you give away your time, because you won't get anything done at the end of that week. All right, so some of you mentioned that emails can be a sinkhole, and we know that they are. And so I've mentioned a few tips already for how to, escape the black hole of emails. So doing a set time, maybe at the beginning of your day, the end of your day, and then sometime before or after your lunch. Or maybe just a few minutes each hour, you can escape your emails. But also reminding yourself that unless it is pivotal, like somebody is waiting on your reply or you are waiting on somebody's reply, that email replies can wait. If you were in a big meeting or if you were at a conference or you were not in front of your computer, you wouldn't even know that email had come in. And so wait until a time that is convenient for you rather than you being at the beck and call of your email. Because most people don't expect a reply right away. If they need you right away, they'll stop in your office, they'll give you a call, they will reach out to you. So unless you know that you have flagged an email that you're waiting to come through your desk, across your desk, then let your reply wait and you be in control over when you reply to emails and when you respond, because it can quickly get away from you. And so I mentioned the 60-second rule, and that can be a good one. But if you are doing that all day long and you're not getting anything done, then you may want to look at combining it with some other time management techniques. But you be intentional about your schedule and your emails. And so you control your time and you don't let them control you. And then the last tip for minimizing distractions is curbing this idea of social sabotage, right? So email is one black hole, but so is social media. So can the water cooler. COVID kind of put it made that less easy to get distracted in person. But as we are returning to more normal work environments where we're seeing each other in the hallway or we're popping in one another's offices, we can easily get distracted by interactions with our colleagues. Now, I don't think we should work in isolation. I think a lot of research supports that we are better when we collaborate, but it is learning you and learning to, if you are one that is, your day is often eaten by social sabotage, then look at scheduling your time, doing intentional lunch meetings or coffee breaks or Zoom calls, and you taking back some of that control. If social media is one of those things, then maybe delete the app off of your phone so that you are not tempted to look at it very often, or just, you're doing it during certain times of the day so it is not eating away at you. But being mindful of these three things will help us minimize our distractions. All right, so some other ways to manage tasks is the first is to track them. This is your good old-fashioned to-do list. If you don't write down your task, you're one, more apt to forget it, but then you don't see the completion. So you don't feel like you're accomplishing things and you are not tracking what you're accomplishing. So there is a lot of gratification research that supports that feeling of accomplishment that we get when we cross something off of our to-do list or when we delete something from our calendar is valid. That it lets us know that, hey, we're doing something. I am doing something with my time. And so, track it so that you see your productivity, but that if you're not being as productive as you would like, then you can also see, hey, why didn't I get things done today? And so it helps form accountability. Now you can do this with, I love a good old just legal pad. I'd like to track my tasks that way. I also track them in my digital calendar so that I can move things from one day to the next if it needs to spill over. This goes back to productivity journaling from last week. But when we track our tasks, either electronically or just with pen and paper, whatever works for us or whatever combination for us, but it can help us see the things that need to be done. It can help us deconstruct, which is the next. And so by deconstructing tasks, it keeps us from procrastinating. It keeps us from being overwhelmed. It allows us to do small things that may fit in a 30-minute window, or that is better reserved if we have an hour or whatnot. And then batching. So batching is Oh, so Heidi put in the chat, if you have an iPhone, she's found the focus tool to be very helpful in minimizing distractions by not allowing notifications from certain apps. You can also set certain contacts as being allowed to break that focus time. That is an excellent tip, Heidi. Thank you for sharing that. And that is one that I use as well. And so I have certain contacts that are allowed to break through so that if there's an emergency with a child or a parent or an in-law or a spouse calls, like I get that right away. But it keeps things from dinging, especially if I need to focus. And so, yeah, we can really maximize technology and those technology tools to help us promote flow. So that's a great tip. Okay, so batching is when we do light tasks together. Batching is, if, we answer all our emails at one time, we may file all things at one time. We might make our phone calls during one time of the day or do writing tasks together. It may be that we batch our task if we are getting up to leave our office to walk down the hall to use the restroom, that we may drop something off at a colleague's office. We may fill up our water bottle, but we will do things together. You can batch errand running. So if you look at the errands that you have to run, what stores are closest to one another, what can be batched together so that you're not running all around everywhere. If you batch your tasks, maybe if you pick up a kid from carpool, can you answer emails in that carpool line and instead use that time to do something like emails? You batch those tasks. And then the final tip that we'll talk about today is targeting. And I've mentioned this a couple times, but it's playing to your strengths. Can you target your tasks so that you are working on the things that are important to you? You're delegating the rest. Targeting can be a really important tool when you're signing up for things to do. I have a colleague who just loves to take notes. I don't get it personally, but I appreciate that she loves to take notes. And so it helps her stay focused during a meeting. And it also helps the rest of us because she targets what she likes and what she does best and sends it out to the team. And so, but if you're a writer or a thinker or whatever you do well, volunteer for those kinds of tasks. Target what helps keep you on track as much as possible. Targeting tasks can also be important when building momentum. So doing those things that you do well first so that you can build some momentum for those things that you don't really want to do or don't feel equipped to do or as equipped to do or feel overwhelmed or some of those other tasks. But how can you target it so that you can find your focus, increase your flow? Okay, and so the last thing that we'll talk about during our time together, and then we'll have some time for Q&A and comments, is this idea of goal setting. So are we being, so if you miss deconstructing, I think that a lot more tips were talked about that for last week. So again, you can reach out to me or you can reach out to Azetta or Jamie with UK Work Life, and we can send you all of the handouts from this series. And so yes, session 2 is on managing your time and your workspace. Organizing your time in your workspace, I believe. Okay, so the goal setting is it's one of those common tasks, right? But we often we'll do dreams, like we'll cast visions, but we don't set specific goals. And the difference between a goal and a dream is a deadline, right? And so when we set specific goals, and so these are SMART goals. Again, if you have done any type of productivity training or workshop or financial literacy, we use goal setting a lot. But it's this idea of, are your goals SMART? Are they specific, measurable, achievable, or attainable, relevant, and timed? So a specific goal is, by the end of today, I will have worked on X project. So I will have completed this project by the end of the day. So it's measurable in that okay, well, did the project get completed? Can I measure my progress on this project? Is it achievable? Is it realistic? So if I have 5 meetings and I am on 5 hours of Zoom or in 5 hours in my office of face-to-face meetings, then my ability to complete a big task is not very achievable, right? And when I set goals that aren't achievable, then that is a self-defeating task before it's even begun. So I want to set myself up for success. And so it's important that when I set goals for myself, whether very long-term goals or medium-term goals or short-term goals, that they are actually stuff that I can achieve. Are they relevant? So am I vested in this goal? Like, is it now, say if you've got to do some filing and you absolutely hate filing, but so it may not be relevant to what you're doing at that moment. It may be one of those busy things you just have to get done, but maybe it is relevant to your overall career goals. By doing this filing, it will help you be more organized. It will help you be more productive, and it'll help you maybe move up the ranks for whatever you're setting your larger sights on. So it still may be relevant to your overall goals. But the more relevant our goals are, excuse me, to our individual accomplishments and to individual tasks, the more likely we are to be vested in their success. And then are they timed? So if it's the end of a day, the end of a week, if it's a specific due date, but you've given yourself or your team accountability for that. And so you know that by X date, and I tell colleagues, give me a date. If you need something from me, you've got to give me a deadline so that I know when I need this accomplished, so that I know when you need this from me. If there are not deadlines, I set them for myself because it is an accountability measure. And so also in the material that you'll get are these goal setting worksheets. And so one is how to go about writing SMART goals. And then there are some additional tips on goal setting within that worksheet as well. Okay, so that is our time together today. I'd love for questions or comments, and I also believe that Jamie has put this link in the box. And I don't know if that's the hyperlink to it. Let's see. But if you could either, if you're on a, let's see, that might do it right there. So that should connect you to the survey. So you can snap it on your phone or you can click the link directly, but I'd love before, when we end our time together, if you would provide feedback on, this lesson or this series in general. But are there any questions or comments? I'll leave the survey up, but are there any questions or comments that I can address for you before we end our time together today?